Picture this. It's 1974. A year prior, in March of 1973, Pink Floyd released their 8th studio album, The Dark Side of the Moon. It was a critical and commercial masterpiece, with some regarding it as the greatest progressive rock album of all time. This marked the peak of the genre, launching progressive rock into a spotlight it's never been under before. But just as peaks signify the height of a mountain, any and all directions are downwards. At the same time this album was released, a second juggernaut of the progressive scene, King Crimson, had exited its interregnum period of instability and formed its third iteration. In sharp contrast to their last album, Islands, which was a softer, jazzier album, their 1973 project, Lark's Tongues and Aspic, was much darker and heavier. It seemed with two powerful new albums pushing the genre forward, it would continue to grow. However, the same could not be said for King Crimson, who made their last stand not even 2 years later. Welcome back to Tambrick, where every album is the greatest album. I'm your host, Ivan. In last week's episode, we analyzed King Crimson's 6th studio album, and the second album made by its third incarnation, Starless and Bible Black. In today's episode, we will be analyzing perhaps the greatest and most impactful album of the group, one which received little commercial success during its release, but has been retrospectively called the most powerful project by the band. It has been praised as progressive rock's finest hour, and has remained in the progressive conscience for over half a century. Perhaps it's the return to longer and more powerful songs, the album's symbol as a phoenix born out of the ashes of a dying group, or simply its place as a marker for the plateau before progressive rock's decline. King Crimson's 7th studio album remains one of its most notable and influential projects. This is King Crimson's Red. Red was recorded and released the same year as Starless and Bible Black. However, the conditions were very different. To Fripp, King Crimson was primarily a live band, and as a result, a majority of Starless and Bible Black was recorded on tour, with many live recordings making the album. Entering the latter half of the year, Cross, who was forced to change from his amplified violin to an overdriven piano and mellotron due to the increasingly forceful rhythm section, withdrew from the group. He was subsequently voted out, leaving the three remaining members, Fripp, Bruford, and Wetton, to rely more on invitational and session musicians for individual tracks. This also gave the green light for Bruford and Wetton to direct the music into increasingly heavy waters, using the drum and bass as a hammer and mallet. The album is considered their heaviest, with many publications arguing for its inclusion in the top 50 heaviest albums of all time. Much of the album had elements lifted from previous projects, which included improvs from Wetton, and the Starless track, which was intended for Starless and Bible Black, but didn't fit into the album at the time. During the recording sessions, Fripp increasingly grew disenfranchised with the music industry and the direction of the genre as a whole, which resulted in a withdrawal from the music. This, coupled with an uncertainty in the album's direction due to Bruford and Wetton's flying brick wall production, meant the tonal and production identity of the album was largely directed by Bruford and Wetton, not Fripp. The album then took the identity of the rhythm section, with multi-layered tracks and heavy percussion taking the forefront of the project. The reason for this disconnect was Fripp's own personal journey, which resulted in his discontent with music. 2 weeks before the release of the album, Fripp would abruptly disband the band, claiming the band had ceased to exist, and it was completely over, forever and ever. At first, speculations regarding this move arose, with many believing it to be nothing more than a publicity stunt by the band to garner attention. However, it soon became clear this was more than that. Fripp had truly grown tired of the music industry, and sought to pursue spiritual and personal matters. The album's name was derived from the music itself, more specifically, the needles on the VU meters, which were observed to be crashing sharply into the red. Wetton believed this was symbolic of the band's musical direction, and for a while, this was planned for the front cover of the album. However, the label decided this was poor marketing and decided on a group photo instead. However, Difficult group relations at the time resulted in a composite shot to appear as if it was taken together. It drops sharp comparisons to the cover of With the Beatles. Putting it all into perspective, the band had gone through a circular metamorphosis within the span of 5 years. In the Court of the Crimson King and the Hyde Park concert, which catapulted the band to international recognition, was but half a decade ago in 1969. This metamorphosis was circular return to their heavier avant-garde style of music. Throughout their interregnum period, the band's jazz influence took forefront, with tracks like Islands, Pictures of a City, and Lady of the Dancing Water using jazz techniques and sounds heavily, as well as using one-layer recordings more often. Even darker tracks like Circus are relatively thin and contrasted immediately. Lark's Tongues in Aspic was classically influenced, with the album being grand but not particularly dark or heavy. It is then this accumulation of 5 years that resulted in Red, an album which contains the essence of the band, where the new direction is simply the amplification of the darkness of past projects and buried grievances. The album is a tonal masterpiece, always relaying some kind of dark undertone, whether it be through lyrics, composition, or playing style. It has deeply ingrained power behind its sound, a callback to tracks like 21st Century Schizoid Man and Epitaph. The final track of the album, Starless, closes the gap between 1974 and 1969. So, how does this album reconnect the band with its origins? The answer, as always, can be heard. The album has 5 tracks. The album's first track, Red, is an instrumental composed solely by Fripp. He describes the piece as an instrumental piece scored for the electric guitar, bass guitar, and drums. The guitar is multi-layered in 3 tracks, once again attesting to the album's heavy sound. It is an ominous track, one which dashes uncertainty onto the crushing of skulls. Just take a listen to this excerpt near the introduction of the song. The song continues to reverberate loudly with uncertainty. A majority of the song alternates between a tritone and a major third, and the unresolved nature of this combination is what defines the mood of the song. The song frames the album and its sentiments perfectly. Firstly, it frames a frustration Fripp was experiencing while composing the piece. Much of the album was recorded in tension, and this piece reflects Fripp's sentiment the best. Secondly, the song is the first proper demonstration of this new rhythm section, with Bruford and Wetton's crashing sound and powerful playing. Thirdly, its dissonance serves well as a reminder to the same creative dissonance the members of the band were feeling during this terminal period. However, even with this abrasive but thoughtful track, it still remains as a weaker song in the album for many, but it still marks Fripp's creative genius nonetheless. If you want to look more in depth about the composition of the piece, Andrew Keeling's analysis on the song is good reading material. Before moving on to the 3 main tracks of the album, I would like to lightly touch on the generally agreed weakest track of the album, Providence. It was an improv taken from the group's show in Providence, Rhode Island, on the 30th of June in 1974. It is a very cryptic and eerie track, with the track's most defining features being its use of silence, chaos, and how unsimilar it is from a regular pop song. It isn't avant-garde per se, but achieves in this album its job: build tension for the final track. The song is also an excellent demonstration of the rhythm section's energy and power, with a majority of the back half featuring a strong bass and heavy drumming. Here's a sample from the more cohesive back half of the song. We'll continue to analyze the remaining 3 tracks after the break. Welcome back. Before the break, we analyzed the 2 instrumental songs on King Crimson's 7th studio album, Red. The first track, Red, is a solo composition which frames the album. The 4th track, Providence, is an improv which builds tension and uncertainty within the album's latter half. We now move on to the 3 primary tracks of this album. The second track, Fallen Angel, is a more structured and perhaps the most song-like out of the 5 tracks. It lacks defining periods of interlude or extensive bridges, and takes the somewhat standard form of a rock song, with 3 verses, a strong and powerful chorus, and interludes of questionable length, but nothing particularly bizarre for the genre at the time. However, what was unique about this song was its true devotion to the band's layering, with there being 4 different guitar layers on the track, all intermingling, phasing in and out at different times in the song. In other terms, the overbearing and powerful guitar layers is the right hook of the combo, paired perfectly with Wetton's rocket launcher of a bass and Bruford's bombshell drums. The song used the chorus of a project by Wetton, a ballad called Woman. It would become an instrumental in Fallen Angel. Without Cross, the band would rely on past members and session musicians for accompanying instruments. There are 4 main parts outside of the obscene guitar layers, the bass, the vocals, and the drums. Fripp plays a mellotron to simulate a string ensemble. Mark Charig plays the cornet, an instrument similar to a trumpet. An uncredited cello enters during the bridge and plays minimally throughout the latter half of the song, and Robin Miller plays the oboe during verses. The cello plays a largely supporting role, seemingly being but a tool for Fripp to add even more layers and density in places which he was not able to before. The mellotron also serves a smaller purpose to add volume to the sound, which is done well to an extent. The cornet, in stark contrast, is greatly audible throughout the chorus and interludes. It provides a sharper sound to the bottom-heavy instrumental line of Fripp. However, the oboe does this slightly better. Not only being less sharp and harsh, the oboe is used when simply less instruments are being played and allows it to be heard better, giving the verses more timbre. Here's a rendition of the oboe part on clarinet. The song's lyrics are deeply fearful. They continue off the motif of fear and uncertainty of Red, with a seemingly calm and gentle ballad shift to a heavy and depressive chorus and interlude, as well as the song having lyrics darker than first expected from its tone. However, a shade of black resides within the song, with the use of tritones or augmented fourths still present in the chorus and interlude. With the song's 3 verses, a grim picture can be painted.
Tears of joy at the birth of a brother, never alone from that time. 16 years through night fights and danger, strangely why his life not mine.
The song is sung from the perspective of an older brother, one who entered into criminal or dangerous gang activities with his younger counterpart. Then, in the last 2 lines, we can infer his younger brother is dead before his 18th birthday.
Lifetime spent on the streets of the city make us the
second verse describes the setting. The brothers lived in an urban city, and the city defined them as people. However, this can all end in a flash or moment, like with the lyricist's brother, who seems to have been stabbed to death by a switchblade. It's important to note that the use of switchblades in particular, especially in America, has been under heavy scrutiny after the major outrage beginning in the 1950s regarding their use as gang tools which kill. The chorus changes the mood a bit. It brings power to the otherwise gentle song, like a mother wailing in pain at the death of a child. Like the feral cry of a wolf, it cuts through the song, making it feel uncomfortable and painful. And as the chorus ends, all these emotions do with it, retransitioning back to a calm sound and demeanor from the music.
Snow-white side streets of cold New York City, stained with his blood all gone. Sick and tired, blue, wicked and wild. God only knows for how long.
The song paints an ending with no resolution. There is no guarantee of better days, nor is there a resolve which is formed. It simply ends. It is as bleak as can be, no matter the musical tonation. It paints a grim future of the world, one where time doesn't go backwards. There is no what-ifs, and only despair lives fully. In the end, the song is the band's first greatly social conscious song, but it leaves everything to the listener. But the average listener feels only despair. The third track of Red is a rock masterclass, from its structure to its lyrics. The song features 2 guitar layers and an alto sax, which makes this song less dense than the last track, but the significantly more powered drums and rhythm work gives a heavy sound nonetheless. In a different sense, the sound is even more powerful than Fallen Angel, as it lacks significant timbric balance. There is no high cornet nor oboe to mitigate the power behind the drums and bass. The alto sax is not high enough to meaningfully extend the range of the sound, and it is slightly abrasive, which doesn't smoothen the heavy bottom. Then, the only thing spreading out these tracks is the mixing and the panning of the tracks. Another interesting feature about the song is its use of a cymbal found in the Trash by Bruford, giving a dissonant and unorthodox sound. It continues to use the tritone or augmented fourth to create tension within the music, which is a bit more subtle but becomes noticeable in the latter half of the song. The introduction is also somewhat dissonant and gives uncertainty to an otherwise assertive track. From the beginning, the song is indicative of the flying brick wall of the rhythm section. The guitar plays a significant role in the intro, but what remains the most dominant sound of the track is the heavy drums throughout the entire duration of the song. They take the forefront of the sound from the beginning of the song and never die down, only briefly giving way for the saxophone. The song consists of 3 extended verses, one which paints a brief but haunting narrative.
Then I live in nightmares, 10,000 feet from the fair, convinced that I
framing is painted vividly. A flight on a Pan Am aircraft, flying at a dangerously low cruising altitude, is told to the singer as safe. He himself also tries convincing himself it doesn't matter and he ought not fret. However, the altitude begins dropping and panic ensues.
So begin as it pour down my neck as I turn round. I heard voices shouting, get off of this housing. A fellow from some sea, now I turbulence can be. The steward made me, but the captain forbade me. One more nightmare.
The scenario continues to unfold, with the passenger of the aircraft unable to do anything, forced only to listen to the directives of the experts in charge, whom he does not fully trust due to their contradictory statements.
Reality stirred me, my angel had heard me. The prayer had been answered, a reprieve had been granted. The dream is now broken, though rudely awoken. Released safe and sound, asleep on the Greyhound. One more nightmare.
In the end, what's revealed is more reassuring than the prior track. It turns out the whole scenario was indeed but a nightmare, and the individual had landed safely in America, now sleeping on a Greyhound, a bus used by music groups when on tour. Note the use of religious language here. It will tie into the interpretation of the song later. It's important to note between the second and third verses, a significant interlude occurs, separating the third verse greatly from the first two. During this interlude, the uncertain motif is continued, with no resolution presenting itself until later in the song. This heightens the paranoia, which continues to build throughout the song and reaches a peak entering the third verse. I think the interpretation of the lyrics are fairly understandable. An airplane is a location where passengers have the least possible control. The aircraft's possible crash is also a heavy allegory in the song's lyrics. To an extent then, not only is this just about a menial bad dream, but can also signify a deeper mentality which permeated the band's members at the end of their North America tour, where the band, the aircraft in the song, was doomed to crash or fail, and as this slow dismantling of the band was causing their altitude and attitude to drop rapidly, none of the members had the power nor capacity to meaningfully stop the inevitable descent of the plane. It could also be the description of the music industry, with the genre and industry declining and fewer breakthrough bands charting yearly, or about the creative direction of the band itself being strapped to its death, where the artists no longer have creative control of their work. In the end of the song, if there was no dream, the song itself tells us what is necessary to save the aircraft, which is supernatural aid from an angel. The situation which entailed the band was so dire that only through divine intervention could the fracturing be prevented. We also have to note that Wetton wrote the lyrics for One More Red Nightmare, and it was not within his power to disband the band, and in the end, it was Fripp who dissolved the group, which exacerbated Wetton's feeling of powerlessness in this scenario. This song, however, does paint a contrast with reality. While the song's resolution does end in a positive manner without a crash, in reality, the same could not be said. The final track on Red is perhaps its most powerful. It's a work of art from its structuring, composition, motif, and allegorical power. It ties a delicate bow around the entire album, and it alone firmly solidifies the album's place in discussions of progressive rock. But what makes it so good? The song is separated into four major sections: the thematic, the central section, the jazz fusion, and the closing thematic. Immediately, this song's structure is a callback to older songs from past albums, like In the Court of the Crimson King. Its thematic is much like the fifth track of their first album, also the title track, The Court of the Crimson King. It's best to note here that the nature of Providence is also very similar to their debut album's fourth track, Moonchild. The end of Starless, with the jazz fusion, can also be compared to the concluding track of their debut, which has an extended and light ending. Firstly, entering the thematic, its structure is somewhat similar to One More Red Nightmare, with 3 verses, with the third verse separated from the first 2 with a modified section of the opening theme. The song opens with a brief introduction featuring the drums, bass, and the string ensemble from the mellotron. After 6 bars, Fripp's guitar joins and plays the theme. The mellotron acts as a backing track in the song, playing throughout the song alongside the rhythm. What's interesting to note is that the guitar plays a largely minimal role in the thematic to give the section a melancholic and slow sound. The song is also played at a very slow tempo, which adds to the mood.
Sundown, dazzling day, go through my eyes, but my eyes turn within, only see starless and Bible black.
The song's lyrics begin with an elaborate first line, sundown, dazzling day. At face value, the only metaphor that can be immediately drawn is the comparison between a sunset and the end of something, but there are a few more lines of analysis that can be postulated here. First, notice the use of the word dazzling. The primary definition of the word signifies brightness or luminosity, especially from the sun, but a secondary meaning pertaining to skill or talent also exists. It's then likely within the first line the theme of the whole song can be derived. Using an analogy of a sunset, lyricist Palmer James shows a pessimistic but accepting view of the band. It's about to end, but while it was up above the sky, it was dazzling, shocking, and blinding the masses. That throughout the day, some of the hottest and brightest moments of the genre were delivered, but like all good things, they end. In other terms, Palmer James exclaims, "It's the end of an era," through an elaborate 3-piece analogy. This first line sets up what is a tonal and thematic magnum opus. With only 3 words, the mood of the song has been set. The third line then peers into the singer's thoughts. While all things good are being laid out, the singer doesn't see any of it, but looks within with melancholy, without observing anything else. This finally ties into the single-line chorus, Starless and Bible Black. Note this line is taken from a radio drama by Dylan Thomas, as was referring to the sky, which is to say, the sky is bleak and empty, without moon or starlight to illuminate it, hence Starless and Bible Black, referencing the black imitation leather covers of many Bible copies. When connecting the chorus with the last line of the first verse, the subject is staring into an inner void, one which is so dark not even distant stars flicker. It is an introspective first verse, and paired with Fripp's dreamy and disconnected guitar and Colin's lofty saxophone, sets an initial mood of light melancholy with dark undertones of bittersweet departure.
Old friend, charity, cruel, twisted smile, and the smile signals emptiness for me.
second verse is slightly more literal. Old friends begin masking their disappointments and grievances with fake smiles, much like the band members did on tour and afterwards, like lying to Cross. If we play into this idea that all the members knew of the elephant in the room, and this was intended to be their last song, it's likely they truly saw nothing after this point, and that all members of King Crimson knew the band was disbanding sooner or later. The chorus here then rings out like a reminder, making it absolutely clear to the subject and the listener of the bleakness within.
Ice blue silver sky fades into gray to a gray hope that opens to be starless and Bible black.
The final verse concludes the short 12-line song. The last verse very clearly describes the overwhelming sentiment of the song. It's all just so bleak. There's a desire to continue, but it's evident this simply isn't possible. All the things that were done are complete, and the band has sung its swan song already. The song then transitions to a central section, a majority of which is rhythm played by Wetton and Bruford, joined in by Fripp on the guitar. Fripp does something interesting here, which is his alternation between the same note on different strings. Here's a clip from that central section. As the central section prepares to break out into jazz, Fripp continues to alternate, but incorporates full bends, half bends, and both at once to create more tonal variety. What's impressive about this bending is his root note is not a full tone down during his full bends, which means there's a subtle pause during his full bends to allow for the proper note to ring out. During the break, Fripp full bends the root note, still just a semitone down, but pulls the bend back halfway to allow for the proper note to ring out. This requires precise timing. Even if the tempo is at 60, he is still playing these bends as 16th notes, which last for not even a full second. Here's a clip of this bending. The song enters an extended 2-part jazz section with an alto saxophone making the return. It gives the track its first and only upbeat moment, which is the only contrast in the album since the second track, Fallen Angel. The song exits its depressive and melancholic state and enters a more impactful but accepting tone. The power which was seen in the second and third tracks, like a sickly eagle stretching its wings out one last time to soar before it inevitably crashes into the ground, reappears here. The album then concludes with a drawn-out, dramatic variation of the theme. Fripp's guitar is revitalized for these final 20 bars, and with the saxophone concludes this bittersweet track. This is King Crimson's Swan Song, the band's last stand. The song does everything it needed perfectly and has been erected as a permanent statue of progressive rock. This third iteration, as a withered shell of its glory days, created a work that outshone everything they accomplished in the last year and a half. Stepping back from the individual sections, the song itself contains larger statements regarding acceptance and the reconnection of roots. Firstly, the song is undeniably bittersweet. From the lyrics and the thematic to the structure of the song, and the little contrast offered near the end of the tunnel of what would have been a one-dimensional, melodramatic theme. The song then becomes a symbol for acceptance and coming to terms. The band is going to dissolve, and darkness and uncertainty lies ahead. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. The song's structure is a perfect demonstration. The listener begins on solid ground, listening to orthodox music, with a clear structure and rhythm. However, they are thrust into an unknown and unorthodox sound, with tonal shifts and time changes every other bar. But as the song goes on, more cohesion comes from the darkness and chaos, which spills out back into a recognizable melody and tune, one which is less dark than the starting point. In a way, the song is a reflection of the listener coming to accept the band, appreciating their unique sound, and understanding their influences. A second interpretation of the song is about reconnection to the past. With the slow and heavy front half, the cryptic center, and the jazzy back half, it's obvious that the song takes great influence from their debut and interregnum albums. In a way, it bridges the gap between the band, now in tatters, and a band once closer than ever. In a twisted way, it's also Robert Fripp's way of positing his independence. He could only rely on himself then, and he can still only rely on himself now. This double-sided interpretation personifies the sentiments of the band more perfectly than any other description. In a way then, the album is just as One More Red Nightmare describes it, a farewell swan song. While each band member began speaking to one another less and less, their music became the only way they could share thoughts and emotion, pouring all their grievances and complaints out, creating the most genuine and ingenious album of their careers. It's Fripp and King Crimson's ability to insert subtleties like the off-tone bends, the fulfilling of chord progressions, the continuation of the augmented fourth motif, and the structuring of music, which makes the album what it is. After all, a well-baked cake is not the same as raw eggs poured over top burnt flour. It takes a certain musical talent to construct a good album. But it takes several creative geniuses and over half a decade of tension and frustration to create Red. It's one thing to form a band and create a bombshell project. It's another to create a multi-decade legacy piece with the broken pieces of a band lying in the mortuary. The album not only acted as a way for communication and a medium for the band, but also as a bookmark for progressive rock. It marked the beginning of the back half of the genre's peak, and by Robert Fripp himself, just years later, would declare the genre dead, artistically void, and no longer innovative. It then acts as the most subtle concept album ever, with every major track contrasting unease with peace, agitation with tranquility, denial with acceptance. It is a project of oxymorons and contradictions, but every contrast describes attitudes better than any way. King Crimson is over. Fripp had declared it so. The perfect end was set out, and the members would set out for their individual pursuits. Even so, the longing still existed, and in the end, Fripp would discover all that was needed of him was some discipline.